What's going on, guys? Well, now that it is the month of July and we're about halfway through the year of 2023, I've seen a lot of other creators talk about their best and their worst of the year so far, and I don't think I've ever done this before. If I have, I've completely forgotten about it. But it seemed like a good time to do it because, it's been an interesting year. I've seen a lot of movies, almost 50 so far, just new releases in the calendar year, and it's going to be interesting to go back at the beginning of January of 2024 when I finally do my ranking of all the films that I end up seeing this year and look back at this video and see maybe where some things have changed. Have there been some even worse films that come out in the back half of 2023? Are there some gigantic hits hidden in the back half that have taken over my top 5? We'll find out in the future, but for now, just strap in, try and enjoy yourselves, and allow me to be completely unoriginal as fuck for the next 30 minutes. And let's start off high and then we'll work our way to the low. Let's talk about the best movies, my favorite movies of 2023 so far. And coming in at number 5 is actually going to be Renfield. Now, this is a movie that seems to be a bit of a love or hate kind of scenario. I've seen a lot of people really down on it, and I've seen a lot of people that love it even more than I do. I just had a really good time with the concept. I got a lot of mileage out of Nicolas Cage's Dracula here. I thought this is a movie that did a really good job of balancing the horror and the comedy and the action. And something that also stood out quite a bit is a movie that is just very entertaining on its surface value and its surface level story, but it also has a bit of commentary in there about abusive relationships and narcissists and breaking free from somebody's hold. And so I thought they did a good job at weaving some of those really important things into the movie to where it's not overtaking the story. It's not becoming like the forefront. The message isn't overtaking the narrative. But if you want to dive into it, if you want to get a little bit more out of the film, it's certainly there. And so aside from maybe a little bit of CGI gore that was over the top at times, aside from still Awkwafina not necessarily being an actress that has sold me on her acting ability so far, I had a really good time with this one. This is one of the year so far that I could see myself rewatching the most. Coming in at number 4 is the current box office whipping boy, and that is The Flash. Now, I didn't have monstrous expectations for this movie. In fact, I was always kind of skeptical when a lot of people were telling me how this movie was just going to clean house and Michael Keaton's Batman's going to bring in hundreds of millions of dollars, and we've seen how that has worked out so far. But I walked into this film just wanting to be entertained, and I was actually surprised at how much I really enjoyed it. I get a lot of entertainment out of time travel stories, and so that element of this film was really enjoyable for me. I do like the character of Barry Allen in The Flash. I'm not in love with Ezra Miller's version of the character, but I still like the story and the journey that the character went on here and experiencing grief and loss and trying to change the past and all those classic themes of time travel movies and the issues that inherently come about when you start messing with time. And then even though I didn't have a lot of built-in nostalgia for Keaton's Batman, because I've never been a massive fan of those movies, I still liked having his dynamic back into the movie, getting him to kick a little bit more ass than he was able to back in 89 and 92. And I really enjoyed revisiting Man of Steel and having Supergirl and a different version of events of those movies. So the movie was highly entertaining for me. If the CGI had not been just unbelievably dog shit, and if they had wrapped up the movie in a little bit better way in regards to the final villain that's revealed, I think I probably would have put this even higher on this list, because there's a lot of things in this movie that just really worked for me. But it's going to go down in history as one of the biggest box office disasters in the world, and this is the absolute definitive sign that audiences are just done with the DCEU. Coming in at number 3 is the biggest surprise of the year so far, and that's going to be Ben Affleck's Air. This is a movie that was not on my radar whatsoever. I never even knew that it was in production, and then I just started seeing advertisements, and what caught my eye was the newest film from Ben Affleck, who has been one of my favorite working directors of the past 10, 15 years. And as much as I love his version of Batman, the biggest thing that I hated about him playing Batman for the time that he did was that it kind of took him away from directing more movies, because I love The Town. I love Gone Baby Gone. Argo's a damn good movie. I'm one of the few people that really liked Live by Night. And Air is just another example of how incredible of a filmmaker this guy is. And it's a story that inherently does not interest me. I'm not a sports guy whatsoever. And so when you go even further into that and you want to hear a story about how the Air Jordans got created, on paper, that's an immediate sell for me. But the way that they tell this story made it one of the most interesting and inspiring movies and stories that I've seen in a very long time, to where it tells it in a place and time to where not only Michael Jordan, but the Nike company were underdogs, which seems ridiculous because they've always been on top as long as I've been alive. And it does a really good job at just telling a story of how people can inspire others. And I'm sure some of it is glamorized to a certain degree because, there's always not as pure motivations in corporations as this movie would like to make it seem. But for the tale that they were taking us on about a little idea that could, with this up and coming basketball guru, it was just a really nice story that had some really good comedy, some great characters, and you just walk away inspired, and you just walk away wanting to do something positive, which we need more of that nowadays. Coming in at number 2 is another massive surprise for me, and that is Extraction 2. Now, I'm somebody who was extremely late to the game on the first Extraction. I didn't watch it until 2 days before I watched Extraction 2. I had a lot of my friends, like Sean Chandler, that were telling me how awesome Extraction was, and they're people that I trust their taste in action movies. And for those that don't know, action sometimes might even be my favorite genre of film. It's certainly always my second favorite, if nothing else. So I love a good old-fashioned, kick-ass, gritty, bloody action film. And for some reason, because this was a streaming service movie, I just never really felt the need or the rush to check it out. But I finally did check it out, really enjoyed the first Extraction. And then I went into Extraction 2, and to me, this movie was better in almost every way than the first Extraction. I loved all of the action here. I love the way that it was choreographed, the way that it was shot. There's like a 21-minute sequence that's framed to be a one-shot that was just absolutely awesome and mesmerizing, where you're looking for the cuts and you can kind of see them if you really want to, but it's so seamless that it's just an incredible feat of action filmmaking. I love Chris Hemsworth in this role, and I like how old school simplistic this action hero of Tyler Rake is. I've seen a lot of people criticize this movie as being too simplistic, where it's like, oh, there's not a lot of plot, there's not a lot of character development, it's just action and blood and kicking ass. And I'm like, well, fair, but so are all of our favorite action movies of the 80s and 90s. And there's a reason why we love those so much, even though most of them don't have a ton of meat on the bones. It's because they deliver what an action film should deliver in spades. A comedy should make you laugh, a horror movie should scare you, an action movie just needs to kick a lot of ass. And so I didn't really have an issue with any of those faults of this movie. And I do think that they give a little bit more of a character arc and a little bit more development to Tyler Rake in this movie than they did in the first film. The only thing that held it back a little bit was just the kid, the middle child of the family that he's trying to extract, who's consistently doing the dumbest things possible. And narratively, I understand like the logic of why he would be torn in that situation, but it still just frustrated the hell out of me that it took the entire movie for this kid to finally realize how stupid he was. But beyond that, I just thought it was a kick-ass action experience, and we don't get a ton of movies like this nowadays that throw back to the 80s and 90s old school action. So when we do get one that's done well, it really works for me. And staying along those same lines, my number 1 of the year so far is John Wick Chapter 4. And this was the first movie of the year that I genuinely loved. We were having a rough year for a few months there where everything was either bad to mediocre good. And this was the first one where I walked out just like, yes, that was fucking awesome. I really like the first John Wick. I love John Wick 2, but John Wick Chapter 3 lost me a little bit. It was still incredible action. There was still a lot of really good things about it, but narratively and logically, that movie just took leaps that just never really worked for me as many times as I've seen it. And so I didn't walk into this with massive expectations. If anything, I expected it to go even further than John Wick Chapter 3. And to me, this one is arguably the best one of the franchise. It's pretty damn close tied with Chapter 2 for me. And depending on what day you ask me, one of those is going to be my favorite. But this one, to me, has some of, if not the most incredible action that we've seen in this franchise thus far, which is a massively high bar. And I think they did a great job at bringing a lot more focus back into the actual story and the lore here, which is what I was missing in Chapter 3. And so to a certain degree, it's almost like they had to retread the familiar territory of 3 to do it in a better way, which I was a little mixed on. But I love Keanu Reeves in this role, and I love a lot of the the lore that they build up regarding the world of assassins and the Continental and how all the rules work. And every single movie has some different piece of the inner workings of this underbelly of this assassin world that we get introduced to. And I love the villain here, to me, the best villain of the franchise in Skarsgård. And so it just took me on a ride for 3 hours that I just loved every single minute of it. And in the third act, there's this very direct callback to the Warriors that just completely lifted me onto cloud nine. Like, I was already really into the movie at that point, but as soon as I saw the way that they framed that DJ's lips as she was talking into the microphone, I was like, oh, it's kind of like the Warriors. And then as soon as she hit that needle drop, nowhere to run to, I was like, oh, they're fucking doing it. That's awesome. So there was moments like that that just put me on the biggest bit of joy that I have had as a moviegoer in 2023. And so I need to rewatch the movie again now that I've kind of had the initial experience come down a little bit. I've come down from the high, and I'd like to kind of binge through all 4 of these movies one last time before I do my ranking at the end of the year to see truly where chapter 4 lies for me. But with my one experience in the theater, this was the best movie-going experience that I've had of the year so far. And now that we've gotten all of the goodies out of the way, now that I've gotten all of the good memories out of the way, let's talk about some not so great memories of movies that I've seen so far in 2023. Now, I will say, while it's been an incredibly mediocre year for movies for me, to where the vast majority of movies that I've seen fall in that like 2.5, 3.5 range, to where it's like, it's decent, or I like it, but I don't love it. That's where most of my movie experiences have landed this year. I have had a grand total of about 8 movies this year that I would genuinely say was just a bad experience, which is not a bad average for having seen about 50 films. But the bottom 5 for me were rough for a variation of reasons. And starting off at number 5 for the worst movies of the year that I've seen thus far is going to be a movie called Nefarious. And if you had told me when I walked into this film that I had absolutely no knowledge of what the hell I was walking into, that this is going to be the biggest bit of controversy that you're going to experience in the year 2023, I would have been dumbfounded. And I'm still kind of dumbfounded. This is a film that I just knew the poster and who was starring in it, in Sean Patrick Flannery. And I had a rough idea just from the images on Fandango when I was buying my ticket that it's some kind of a demonic possession story. So is it horror? Is it thriller? I don't know. I walked in blind. And it turned out to be a faith-based Christian film that basically is just having 2 people, a demonically possessed serial killer and an atheist psychologist, have a conversation for the entire movie. And one after another, it just goes through some very Christian and very conservative views, to where it's framing the atheist and the non-believer as the person that needs to be enlightened and awakened to the reality of these issues. And so while I appreciated Sean Patrick Flannery's performance, it's easily the best thing in the movie and the only thing to see it for. And while I appreciated the kind of scaled down setup of just get 2 guys in a room and battle ideologies, the execution for me was just so heavy-handed and so preachy and so propagandish that I just couldn't enjoy it whatsoever. And the funny thing is, in my review, and to this day, I still have not said whether I disagree or agree with some of the views in the movie. And there's some that I agree with and some that I disagree with. But my review has caused a massive amount of Christians and conservatives. I must be on a subreddit somewhere to just flood my video that's at like 75,000 views at this point every single day with a variation of comments of, this guy is exactly who the demon was warning us about. And of course, this guy must like all the leftist movies. And They/Them was probably in his top 5 of last year. It was actually my bottom 5 of last year. I was wearing a Chucky shirt. Now I'm wearing a Freddy shirt. And it's like, oh yeah, he likes Chucky. So of course he hasn't grown up enough to experience this movie. It's just been the most massive dog pile of ignorant bullshit that I have experienced since Halloween 2018. And it's just been hilarious to watch. Just a massive amount of people talking out of their ass. But nonetheless, it's just talking specifically about the movie. If you want to go and have your views kind of spit back out at you and reassured and validated, then I'm sure it's a rewarding experience. If you're somebody that disagrees with any of these views, this movie is not going to challenge those views whatsoever and accomplish the goal that they want, which is to make you consider what they're talking about. And if you're somebody like me, that it doesn't matter if you're talking about views that I agree with or views that I disagree with. I didn't sign up for a fucking sermon. I signed up for a movie, and that's not what this was. And so I just didn't enjoy it whatsoever. And unfortunately, I'm going to be forced to somewhat discuss it throughout the rest of the year, because I'm sure those views and those comments are going to keep trickling in. Coming in at number 4 is going to be Fear. And this is another movie that I knew nothing about. All I knew was that it was like a week or two after this movie came out. Nobody was talking about it. And I just saw it on Fandango when I was searching for what movies were coming out this week. And I was like, what the hell is this? And why is nobody discussing it? And so I walked in, and then I walked out and said, oh, I know why nobody's discussing it, because it fucking sucks. This is a movie where you get a group of people together in this little cabin in the middle of, not really the woods, but just this isolated cabin where they're going to have like a friend reunion. And there's some kind of witchcraft going on within this building, to where one by one they all start to have their perceptions altered and they all start to get paranoid. And it's one of those very cliched get people together and they slowly start to lose their minds kind of scenarios. And it's so dull and it is just so mishandled that I struggle even now to remember any details beyond just that basic setup. One thing that I do remember is that it's more or less a group of black friends, and then you get one white guy, if I am not mistaken. I think it's only one. And not that there's anything wrong with that. I'm sure there's tons of groups. I mean, I've been in groups like that before, but his personality just does not line up with the group of people that he's in, to where I never believed for a second that he actually would be in that group of friends. Regardless of his race, it's just like he's this weird egghead guy that doesn't match with any other character that he's surrounded by. And so the whole time, even just the group dynamic of the friends just felt off, to where you couldn't even buy into the relationships that are building this movie. And so it's easily the most forgettable movie that I've seen this year, hence why I can't really tell you anything else about why it's pretty lame. But I remember just walking out going, yeah, that happened. Coming in at number 3 is going to be the newest Children of the Corn. And it's funny because when this movie came out, I pretty much dedicated myself to watching the rest of the Children of the Corn movies, and I was going to do a ranking. And I got almost all of the way through them and then just stopped because by then I had watched like 10 films and I couldn't tell you anything about any of them. This is the worst horror franchise that I have experienced so far. Like, it doesn't have the lows of something like Wrong Turn, but it's just the same 2 or 3 details spread across like 12 movies. And my God, is it mind-numbing. But it's talking specifically about this new one. I thought this movie was absolutely horrendous when I walked out of it. And then I watched the rest of the movies and I was like, oh, that's like a top 4 Children of the Corn movie. So maybe if you've experienced these movies and you know how garbage they are and you're looking forward to a decent one, maybe you'll get more enjoyment out of this than I did my first watch. But it's just the same old setup of this rural town in, a bunch of cornfields where the adults want to do one thing and then the kids have a revolt and take over the town. But it's got like a TV movie budget. And aside from the main performance of the little girl who's like the new Isaac, I guess, she was pretty decent. Everybody else in the movie just has nothing going for them, especially the protagonist girl. And there wasn't even really that much of an attempt to do anything creative with the kills or the gore or the intensity. It's just the same scenario that we've already seen a bunch of times, done again, but done in, I think this was filmed in like 2019 or 2020. It's sat on the shelf for a couple of years before it actually made it out. The only thing that they actually do in this movie to make it different than the others is they actually give you a physical embodiment of He Who Walks Behind the Rose. And my God, this is one of those times where it's like, okay, yeah, the suggestion of what it could be is much better than the reality, because what the fuck was this I Am Groot looking motherfucker? Oh my God. So yeah, this is a movie that just, it came and went as quick as you could go in a theater. I was actually shocked that they even gave it a theatrical run. This is like a straight to VOD movie all day long. And there is just no hope for this franchise ever having a good installment because this concept has just been done to death. Coming in at number 2 is going to be Skinnamarink. Now, of the 5 movies that I'm discussing in my negatives, this is the one that I feel the most conflicted on putting here because there's a lot of artistic merit and some interesting experimentation with what this movie is doing that I kind of appreciate. And the victory story that it had as far as this no-budget movie that this very independent filmmaker put together and then got a bit of virality with the marketing and suddenly got a lot of success when it was in theaters is cool, and I do want to champion that. But I would be lying if I didn't tell you that beyond appreciating some of the experimental nature of it, this was a pretty miserable watch. You know, this is something that would have been cool for like a 20-minute short film, and I would have really appreciated it. For a 100-minute movie, I believe it was, maybe even longer than that, it was excruciating to sit through because it's just a bunch of different abstract shots of this house in a very lo-fi, low-res format with a little bit of dialogue here and there that is impossible to distinguish, to where they actually have to put subtitles throughout the movie just for you to be able to understand what people are saying because it's absolutely inaudible. And then they make the weird creative decision in the third act to take away the subtitles. So now you're hearing dialogue that you just absolutely can't distinguish what the hell people are saying. And so there's creative decisions there to try to emulate the nightmares of a child and the experience of waking up from a nightmare and trying to distinguish some of the details that are just foggy in your head. And again, there's parts of that I like and I appreciate the creativity for, but just as a viewing experience, this thing was extremely rough. And, you know, there's not been any middle on this film. You either adore what it does or this is just agonizing for you. And so while I champion this guy, I hope he's going to do something a little bit more palatable with the money and the success he's going to have for his next film. This was a very, very, very rough viewing experience that I can't think of a single person that I would recommend it to. But of course, coming in at number 1, the movie that has remained my worst of the year, and a movie I'm very confident is going to remain my worst of the year all the way through to the end of December, is going to be Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey. And much like Nefarious, if you had told me that this is the movie that's going to cause you a lot of controversy and a lot of bullshit, I would have told you you're nuts. Like, who the hell isn't expecting this to be bad? That's not going to be a controversial statement. Oh boy. So yeah, this is a movie that from the moment that it was advertised, I saw right through it. I saw the cynical approach that they were going for here. You have a public domain property that suddenly is open for anybody to do whatever they want with. And so somebody said, you know what? We can just make a really fucked up slasher film with one of the most beloved children's properties of all time. And just the controversy, all that is going to create all of this buzz and we're going to get at least our budget back easy. And you're never going to convince me that that wasn't 100% the motivation of making this movie. And while you could have taken a very cynical motivation like that and still put some creativity into it, still put something of a satirical spin or done some kind of a spoof of Winnie the Pooh and really just put some entertainment value into the movie, there was no attempt at that whatsoever. It was the most baseline, basic, and low budget, quickened production of what that cynical approach could have been. It was shot in a week. It was thrown out. There is no budget on screen. There's no acting ability on screen. There's no creativity in the kills. There's no actual creativity or value in the looks and the designs of Winnie the Pooh and Piglet. It's just a generic mask on top of a hillbilly in suspenders. So from start to finish, aside from the opening animated thing that kind of set the tone, which I kind of appreciated, everything else in this movie was just trash. I didn't expect it to be good, but I expected maybe it was going to be so bad that it's good, and you walk in and no, it's just bad. It's just nothing. There's nothing there to value or to get entertainment value for. And the vast, vast, vast majority of people that have seen this movie and talked about it have said exactly that. But for whatever reason, the studio, the director, the producer, I think even the composer, they decided just to make me the public enemy number 1, as if I'm the only person on the fucking God's green earth that didn't like Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey. And that's fine. You know, that's part of Twitter discourse. You know, there's a certain amount of me asking for it, I guess, when you put your opinions out there publicly where the creators of the film can see it and react to it. And if I made something, I certainly understand not liking somebody not liking what you created, but have a little fucking self-awareness of what you actually made. But beyond that, I've seen them go on beyond me and attack other people in their comment sections and attack anybody that defended me or said, hey, he's just giving his opinion. And I've just seen nothing but the grossest reaction from a studio that I've ever seen for a movie that was released wide. And so while normally I would look at a production like this that was extremely cynical from the get, but ended up making a lot more money than I think even they thought, and I could have at least tipped my hat and given a thumbs up saying, hey, you know what? You had a get rich quick scheme with this movie. And while I don't necessarily appreciate you using the theatrical experience and charging people money to do that, hey, you had a scheme and it worked and you made a hell of a profit on it. I could have at least tipped my hat to that. But because the studio and everybody involved that decided to jump into that reacted the way that they reacted to people that didn't like their film, which as of now is mostly everybody that I've seen. I mean, every YouTube channel that I've seen cover this film still has it as their worst of the year. Even Watch Mojo, for Christ's sake, has it as their worst of the year so far. When you react the way that you react, I'm not going to root for anything you do in the future. I could have at least said, hey, you know, take the money that you got with this one and put it to better use in the future. Maybe your second film would be so much better. And maybe this was just a necessary step of evil to get to some really good movies in the future. But the future of whatever the studio does, I have no interest in even knowing what the hell it is. I'm not giving it a chance. I'm not even going to acknowledge it or cover it. So good luck with Winnie the Pooh, Bloodier and Honeyer, or whatever the fuck lazy shit it's going to be called. Well, that's it for this one, guys. Those are my best and the worst of the year so far. If you want to check out my playlist of all of the movies I've reviewed in this year so far, check right over here. I'm also going to put my review of Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey up here if you want to dive into some more of my in-depth thoughts, as well as please like and share and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss whenever I re-rank all the movies that I've watched by the end of the year later on. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.